Hey everyone, Brandon here from Trucksafe Consulting. Now we talk a lot about DOT regulations on this channel and we tend to get pretty far into the weeds, but it's always good to take a step back and remember that the overarching goal of these rules is to reduce highway accidents involving large trucks and buses. Sure, some of the rules are better suited to accomplish that goal than others, but the idea is that as a whole, the regulations are there to minimize the likelihood of serious accidents. That in mind, it should come as no surprise that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and its state partners would have rules in place requiring motor carriers to keep track of the accidents in which their vehicles and drivers have been involved. More specifically, the regulations require motor carriers to maintain a register of all DOT-recordable accidents that have occurred over a certain time frame. But what exactly qualifies as a DOT-recordable accident and what are the implications? Those are the questions we're tackling in this video. So stay tuned and do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe buttons below if you find this type of content helpful. So like I said, as a general rule, the federal and most state safety regulations require regulated carriers to keep a register that tracks their DOT-recordable accidents for a period of 3 years. Now, the FMCSA and its state partners routinely request and review these registers during audits, so it's important to have them and understand precisely what type of accidents have to be included. Now, whether an accident qualifies as DOT-recordable depends on whether it fits within the definition of an accident under Section 390.5 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. According to that definition, accident means an occurrence involving a commercial motor vehicle operating on a highway in interstate or intrastate commerce, which results in, number one, a fatality, number two, bodily injury to a person who, as a result of that injury, immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene of the accident, or number three, one or more motor vehicles incurring disabling damage as a result of the accident, requiring those vehicles to be transported away from the scene by a tow truck or other motor vehicle. The term accident does not include an occurrence involving only boarding and exiting from a stationary motor vehicle or an occurrence involving only the loading or unloading of cargo. So any accidents that fit within this criteria are considered DOT-recordable and any that don't are not. Of course, as you might expect, there can be some nuance to this analysis. For its part, the FMCSA has tackled some of the most frequently asked questions in its regulatory guidance. Let's take a look at a few of these. First up is a scenario where a commercial vehicle becomes stuck in a median or on a shoulder and has had no contact with another vehicle, a pedestrian, or a fixed object prior to becoming stuck. If a tow truck is used to pull that commercial vehicle back onto the traveled portion of the road, the question is, would this be considered an accident? To which the FMCSA responds no. All right, next up is the question, to what extent would the windshield and or the mirrors of a vehicle have to be damaged in order for it to be considered disabling damage as used in the definition of an accident? To this, the FMCSA responds that the decision as to whether damage to a windshield or mirrors is disabling is left to the discretion of the investigating officer. Next up, must a person who is injured in an accident and immediately receives treatment away from the scene of the accident be transported via ambulance? Here, the agency says no, any type of vehicle may be used to transport an injured person away from the scene of the accident to the treatment site. Now, the term immediate in this context, the agency says, means without an unreasonable delay. A person immediately receives medical treatment if he or she is transported directly from the scene of an accident to a hospital or other medical facility as soon as it is considered safe and feasible to move that person. And lastly, here's another scenario. Here, a person is transported to a hospital from the scene of a commercial vehicle accident. In one situation, the person undergoes an observation or a checkup. The question is whether this is considered medical treatment, making the commercial motor vehicle occurrence an accident for purposes of the federal rules. To which the FMCSA responds no. A person who does not receive treatment for diagnosed injuries or other medical intervention directly related to the accident has not received medical treatment as that term is used in the regulations. Okay, and in a second situation, the person undergoes an X-ray examination or is given a prescription but is released from the facility without being admitted as an inpatient. Is the X-ray or the prescription considered medical treatment sufficient to bring the accident within the definition of the federal regulations? The FMCSA answers that the person who undergoes an X-ray examination or other imaging, such as a CT scan, has not received medical treatment. The X-ray examination is a diagnostic procedure, but is not considered medical treatment. However, a person who is given a prescription medication or the prescription itself has received medical treatment. Okay, so now that we know what types of accidents qualify as DOT recordable, the next question is what information must be included on the motor carrier's accident register? To that point, Section 390.15 of the federal rules provides that a motor carrier's accident register must include the following information for every DOT recordable accident. Number 1, date of accident. Number 2, the city or town or the most near where the accident occurred and the state where it occurred. Number 3, the driver's name. Number 4, the number of injuries. Number 5, the number of fatalities. And number 6, whether hazardous materials other than fuel were released in connection with the accident. The rules require motor carriers to maintain this information on their accident register for a period of 3 years. Additionally, carriers must obtain and retain copies of all accident reports prepared by law enforcement and/or their insurers for all such accidents. Now, a fairly common question we receive from our clients is whether DOT recordable accidents have to actually be reported to the DOT. In other words, do we have to proactively notify the agency when our drivers or vehicles have been involved in a recordable accident? And the answer is no. The FMCSA doesn't generally require motor carriers to report any accidents to the agency, though it will typically be aware of those accidents by virtue of the fact that they are uploaded by law enforcement to the FMCSA's Motor Carrier Management Information System, or MCMIS for short, and the Safety Measurement System. Now, that said, the FMCSA does require certain carriers to report DOT recordable accidents, including those operating under a regulatory waiver. Additionally, even though accidents may not be reportable to the FMCSA, they may very well be reportable to another state or federal agency. Some states, for example, require motor carriers to report certain types of accidents. Likewise, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration requires carriers to report certain accidents that result in the unintended release of hazardous materials. Another fairly common question we hear is whether accidents that are not preventable on the part of the motor carrier's driver are nevertheless considered recordable. Historically, the FMCSA has not taken preventability into account when it comes to a motor carrier's regulatory obligations flowing from a recordable accident. In other words, whether or not the accident was the motor carrier's or its driver's fault, the accident would still need to be recorded on the accident register and would still impact the carrier's overall accident rate and SMS scores. That's still the case when it comes to notating the accidents on the carrier's accident register, meaning that all recordable accidents, regardless of fault, must be included. With that said, the agency has recently taken steps to begin considering preventability in the context of how these accidents impact a carrier's safety score. All right, lastly, I want to wrap things up by discussing the implications of DOT recordable accidents. In other words, how they impact motor carriers and their drivers. Well, for one, the number of recordable accidents that a motor carrier has incurred over a period of 12 months is used to calculate that carrier's accident rate. This rate is important because the FMCSA considers it, along with any violations discovered during a compliance review, to calculate the carrier's safety rating. According to the FMCSA's safety rating methodology, a carrier with an accident rate of more than 1.5 accidents per million miles for non-urban carriers, or 1.7 accidents per million miles for urban carriers over the course of a 12-month period, will fail that portion of the audit, which could lead to a downgraded safety rating. By way of example, if a carrier had 4 recordable accidents in 2019 and traveled a total of 2 million miles that year, its accident rate would be 2 accidents per million miles, which would cause it to fail that accident portion of the audit if it were selected for one. Recordable accidents also impact carriers through their SMS accounts. In particular, the crash indicator basic is premised on the number and the type of recordable accidents in which the carrier has been involved over the past 24 months. Carriers with a high crash indicator score relative to their peers may be at an increased risk for enforcement action, including warning letters, audits, and civil penalties. And finally, whether or not an accident is recordable can have some bearing on whether the commercial driver involved must submit to a post-accident DOT drug and alcohol test. As a preliminary matter, it's important to remember the FMCSA's drug and alcohol testing regulations only apply to drivers who operate vehicles or combinations that require a commercial driver's license. These generally encompass those that exceed 26,000 pounds, those that are designed or used to transport more than 15 passengers, or those that haul placardable quantities of hazmat. Drivers that operate vehicles that don't require CDL are not subject to the federal drug and alcohol testing requirements and therefore are not required, at least under the federal rules, to be tested following a recordable accident. For CDL drivers, on the other hand, a recordable accident will necessitate post-accident drug and alcohol testing if Number one, the accident involves a fatality, or number two, the commercial driver is cited for a moving violation in connection with an accident involving either an injury to any person that requires immediate medical attention away from the scene or disabling damage to any vehicle that requires it to be towed. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this video. For even more in-depth information about these types of regulatory topics and major aspects of the federal and state safety regulations, be sure you check out our innovative online compliance courses for safety managers and drivers over at trucksafeacademy.com. Also, be sure to check out our detailed compliance articles on our website at trucksafe.com and follow us on our various social media pages for the latest highway transportation news and analysis. Thanks for watching.